Hello everyone, welcome to the 5th episode of the MCU Ranked review, where every week the three of us review every single Marvel movie in order, then rank them from the best to the worst. I am your host, Hoodie. To my right, found in the depths of the Thailand jungle, he's the world's second, maybe third, best detective, Zero.
Definitely the first.
And to my left, from a galaxy far, far away, but not far enough, president of the Jar Jar Binks fan club, Geyser.
Hey.
Guys, the show is brought to you by our Patreon, patreon.com/KatoYT. If you head on over there and pledge just a single dollar, then you can be watching the whole show 1 week earlier. And if you pledge a little more, you can be watching an exclusive Spider-Man version of this series. But enough of that. This week, we dial the clock back and travel to a politically correct version of the 1940s with Captain America, the first Avenger. Let's start off with this, guys. I enjoyed this movie a lot.
I
thought
really,
this movie was...
really liked this movie too.
Yeah.
Well, you say of course, but this is not like... I mean, people aren't putting this in the top 5 when they're talking about Marvel movies. I don't know where people usually rank it, but I've seen people say, like, this movie's kind of boring, or, you know, maybe, like, middle of the pack type stuff. But I don't know. I mean, the way I kind of view it is, having watched all the movies leading up to this, every complaint that I've had with the movies thus far, I did not have with this movie at all. Like, there was no villain problem where it's like, whatever that may mean. So, like, for Obadiah, it's them going crazy for no reason, or for, you know, or like the third act is just some weird CGI fuckfest like the Incredible Hulk, or like, yet to an extent, Red Skull had the same powers as Captain America, but that was such a non-factor because, like, they didn't really fight, and, like, if they did fight, there were other factors at play, like the plane being, you know, in the air, or, you know, Red Skull had a gun, to which these things, like, the fact that they were both super soldiers, to an extent, didn't really matter. So, in that sense, no villain problem whatsoever. In fact, you know, Red Skull was great. Mm-hmm. No third act problem. I thought the ending was amazing. I thought, for once, the romance was, like, undeniably good. Like, we thought Pepper Potts, we were, like, kind of indifferent to not really liking it. With the Incredible Hulk, we didn't really like it. With what's the other one? Thor, we thought, like, this is fine. This one, I was like, I enjoy this. It's not indifference. I like Peggy Carter. I like the dynamic she has with Steve Rogers.
I definitely have in my notes that Peggy and Cap are the best relationship in the MCU so far.
Yeah, easily, by far. In fact, after watching this movie, I was like, man, I might watch the Agent Carter show. Like, I haven't seen it. I don't know. I'm not going to commit to watching it, but I'm going to consider it.
I thought about that too.
On top of that, now this isn't necessarily a problem that I think has existed in the Marvel Universe, but it certainly wasn't a problem here either, is I thought this movie had a great side cast with, like, you know, you had Dr. Erskine, played by Stanley Tucci, was great. The General, Tommy Lee Jones, he was great. Arnim Zola, great. Bucky, great. Like, so much. This movie had so much going for it that it blows my mind that people don't consider this, you know, in the conversation with other movies. Like, yeah, sure, okay, it's not Infinity War good or whatever, but, like, if you're gonna put Iron Man up there, I think you definitely have to put Captain America up there.
Yeah, 100%.
Definitely.
Anything before we just head straight into the plot synopsis?
Not particularly. I mean, anything I could say would just be really a reiteration of what you said. I thought the movie was fantastic. I really liked everything about it. I thought Peggy and Cap were great. One of the things that I really liked about it was, I feel like this movie especially was very story-driven. Like, it's an action movie, and there was a lot of action, but you're right, like, there wasn't a lot of, like, serious fight scenes about... like with Captain America and Red Skull. It's not like we were leading up to them having a fist fight. Like, it was pretty brief, and there were other stakes involved that weighed much more heavily emotionally, I thought. And I thought that really helped the movie, you know, give it an edge over others. I
agree with that, but also on that note is, if I were to detract anything from this movie, is that I think maybe it doesn't put enough emphasis on the fights. I think, you know, in contrast to the other movies we've seen, I thought it was a fresh take to just not have that be a big deal. But at the same time, when we got to that, you know, we'll get into this with the plot recap, but when we got to that middle part of the movie where it was like, all right, let's dismantle 6 Hydra bases, we'll do it in a 4-minute montage. It's like, okay, well, maybe I wanted to watch some of that.
Yeah, come on.
All right, let's just jump straight into the plot. If you haven't seen Captain America, the first Avenger, this is basically how it goes. We open up. We're in the middle of the Arctic tundra. It's we're following these two guys in a truck. They show up and they're like, "We're with the government. We're here to help you scoop out this this ship you guys found or whatever." Pan over, and it's not a ship. It is a huge flying saucer of sorts. They go in. They start like digging around. They crack open the ship, and inside they find a Captain America shield frozen in ice, and they say, call up the dude at the government. He's got to come down. Cut to New York City. We're in a little recruitment center for the army. We see...
Skip Norway.
What's in Norway?
The Hydra.
Cut to Norway. we're in some sort of religious tomb of sorts. I don't know. There's these two dudes, they're talking Norwegian to each other, and then someone shoots one of the dudes, and then Hydra comes in, and basically they get the Tesseract. I mean, that's basically the gist of that scene is that we see Red Skull come in the first time. Oh no, did you notice that Red Skull had a mask on?
Yes.
Yeah,
I actually really liked that because you could see the split in his neck.
Yeah, it was actually, the thing is, it wasn't even oh, you have to have a good eye. I mean, clearly you wouldn't notice it if you didn't know to look for it, but once you know it's there, it's not oh, freeze frame, zoom in, enhance, it's oh, yeah, it's there. It's right there, I see it. So, okay, so Red Skull comes in to this tomb, he pushes open this, sarcophagus of sorts, pulls out this Tesseract cube of sorts, says, this is fake, throws it on the ground, goes over to this thing. Now, last week, I talked about, we did Thor, and I had talked about some of the Norse mythology they were throwing around, some of the terms, and how I recognized some of them. And one of the things I said I recognized was a thing called the Yggdrasil. Comes in again here. Yggdrasil, the tree of life. Red Skull goes up to a mural, or some wall depiction of the Yggdrasil, the tree of life, and on that tree is a snake. And he presses on the snake. He just knows exactly. He says, I know this thing's hiding right here. Presses on the snake, opens it up, bam, it's the Tesseract. Now, for those who maybe didn't pick this up, basically, if you remember, I did some trivia for this. This spot in Norway, same spot that the Frost Giants fought the Asgardians back in Thor when we get that whole backstory. Oh. What one could assume from that is that during that fight, somehow the Asgardians or the Frost Giants left the Tesseract on Earth, and now it's here.
I don't know if you guys
Cue to Hitler and Red Skull looking for it. Red Skull find it. Cut to New York City. Steve Rogers in a recruitment center. He goes up to the guy, or no, before we get to that, just to get a good idea of who Steve Rogers is as a character. One of the guys sitting next to him says, man, a lot of people are dying out there. Kind of makes you not want to go. Steve Rogers says, fuck you, you little pussy, I'm going. And then walks up to the doctor of sorts. The doctor says, give me your file, looks through it, and you see all of these illnesses. It's a 20-page book of every single illness in the world that Steve Rogers has. And so he's like, no, you can't join the army. And Steve, upset, leaves. Cut to movie theater. Right before the movie, they're playing this sort of a commercial ad for joining the military. Some guy in a row up in one of the front rows is saying, skip this, I don't want to watch this. Steve, good old patriot, good old American boy, says, can you show some respect? They get into a little tussle. They go outside. And then this dude's basically he's a big guy. Steve's a little guy. He's beating him up. And we get the iconic line. Well, we get two iconic things. Captain America pulls out the trash bin using it as a shield. Also, he says, I could do this all day. Both of those things very iconic to the character. Captain America says that in every movie, I think. Then Bucky shows up, comes in from behind, just new. Bucky's keen to these sorts of things. As I know my friend Steve Rogers getting beat up in an alleyway somewhere. So he comes in and, he's dressed in his sergeant uniform, beats up this bully. And then Steve and Bucky just have a sort of conversation about the fact that Steve has tried to enlist in the army 4 different times under 4 different names, or 4 different backstory locations, whatever. And then he says, hey, let's just go to this Stark Expo thing. I got 2 dates. Let's just go have some fun.
So I thought it was interesting, just before you continue, didn't mean anything to the movie, but in hindsight, watching Bucky come and save Steve Rogers was kind of funny. I just kind of enjoyed that scene.
For any reason in particular, or?
No, just like, so looking back and thinking about how, like, you know, Winter Soldier and Civil War are all about, like, Captain America trying to help Bucky out and everything, and here he is, like, at the very beginning, and Bucky literally just comes and saves his ass. Like, I just thought it was fun to see that, and, like...
Got each other's back.
Yeah, like, this is...
As your Lord and Savior George Lucas, Messiah of the prequels, said, it's like poetry. It rhymes. Now,
yes.
Okay, so we go to the Stark Expo, and these, this double date's going on. They walk up to Howard Stark doing a presentation. Howard Stark is presenting this car without wheels. It could basically levitate. Doesn't quite work, but he plays it off with that Stark charm. You could see the father-son resemblance here. I mean, Howard Stark definitively plays into part of the amazing side cast. He does not have much time, but in the little time he does have, he provides a lot of personality, and you could definitely see where Tony gets it, where Tony gets his from.
And you noticed that the thing that they were at was the same, like, science fair thing that happens in Iron Man 2.
I don't know if they specifically called it the Stark Expo, but it is very clearly... They did?
Yeah, it was also an Iron Man 1.
Okay, so... so they're building this... Oh, so this kind of... I don't know, it kind of bugged me a little bit. Isn't it kind of weird how 1940s Stark developed and premiered a car that could, like, levitate, but...
But they don't have that in modern day...
Yeah. So, one of my complaints, and this is really minor, but I guess that takes place in 42 or 43, and I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that cars were not as popular as they make them look in that movie. Like, I just don't think as many people had cars as they showcased. So having a car that flies is like... most people can't even afford a car as it is. And you're showcasing a flying car?
It just seems like Stark was maybe a little too ahead of his time for this. And at the very least, it would be one thing if he was, like, in the privacy of his own lab, he showed someone that, like, he has a flying car. But it's like, if he's displaying it to the public, then you think that's going to be expedited and out within the next 10 years. But whatever.
Think.
That's just a little nitpick. So... Steve, during the middle of this presentation, his date's really not paying attention to him. No one likes short guys. He hears off in the distance, there's a little recruitment thing going on just in the middle of this fair. So he sneaks off and he goes to this thing, and we get the scene of there's a giant, or there's like a poster on the wall with the soldier with his head cut out, and you're supposed to stand on there, and it puts your head in the soldier's head, and he steps on and he's too short. He just doesn't even reach the hole. Bucky shows up and they get into a little spat of like, dude, you gotta let it go. People are, and then Steve's like, people are laying down their lives, and what right do I have to not be doing the same? Meanwhile, while they're talking about this, Stanley Tucci is in the background. He's just sort of listening in. He's perusing, shopping around for people he might recruit into his little super soldier program. He hears, this little boy, Steve. He's weak, but he's got a good heart. So, Bucky leaves to go dancing with the two dates. Steve goes to sign up. And the doctor looks over his record, then steps out. In steps Stanley Tucci. He says, join me, I guess. Was there more to that conversation? Did he just say, hey, come on, let's go?
He said, do you want to kill Nazis?
Yeah, that's true. He said,
and Steve was
that's
like,
basically
fuck
it.
Yeah.
I've noticed that, so I did look this up. At this point, we are still not Disney yet. So I noticed that this movie, was a little graphic at points. I mean, not like really graphic, but there's a scene at the end of the movie where a guy gets destroyed by like an airplane blade, and you see like the blood dissipate into the air. And then Stanley Tucci's talking about killing Nazis, and I mean that's not a controversial statement, is to say kill Nazis, but like still, I mean that's strong language.
It's not nearly as bad as the comics, man.
Okay, we'll get into that at the end. Okay, so go to I think we just cut straight into the army at this point.
Yeah.
Now, okay. So we're with a specific branch of the army that is just training for like the selection of the super soldier serum. Only one of them gets picked. There's like, I don't know, 20 people maybe. There's a lineup of dudes. They all seem sort of like meatheads. In comes Peggy Carter, British SHIELD operative of sorts. Comes up, and one of the dudes is being a dick to her, you know, sort of like making fun of her accent and, you know, calling her the queen and whatever. So she just knocks him out. You know, here's the deal. I usually say that as a joke, where it's like, and then he punches him, and that's like, but that doesn't actually happen. No, she actually just punches him, knocks him out. The one time, I'll say they just stole that one from me. So in comes Tommy Lee Jones.
The work environment that they live in.
Yeah.
Colonel Chester Phillips, I believe his name is. He comes in, he's talking to them, he gives them a rundown, talks about how good men win wars, basically. Looks down at Steve Rogers, not convinced. This kind of bothers me, because, listen, if this is the super soldier program, you already know that, like, whoever you put in there is gonna come out a super soldier. Why do you care so much about Steve being small? Like, why is this such a big deal?
Because if he's already strong, he could be a super duper soldier.
See, I did think about that, and that may be true, but I guess. I don't know, maybe. Just, I don't know. Sure.
Yeah,
whatever.
Look what
fine.
happened when Chad Bruce Banner got it.
Sure. Okay. So basically at this point, we just sort of go into, not a montage of sorts, but we sort of fast forward through training, and we get a couple scenes. One of them is a scene that I actually don't really like. I think it's good until you start thinking about it. That scene is when they're all doing the lap, and you see they stop at the flagpole, and the guy says, if any one of you can get this flagpole, then you are free from doing the rest of the run. All of the soldiers just try to dash up the pole. None of them make it. They continue. Meanwhile, Steve Rogers strolls up behind them, dismantles the pole, it falls down, and he just goes up and picks up the flag, basically. Then he gets to ride with Peggy Carter. Now, what the scene demonstrates is that Captain America is smart. You know, like he's not just a meathead. You know, he has some sort of clever thinking to him. But indeed, I think this is very contrary to the character that I think they want to make and that I think of when I think of Captain America. Because to me, when I picture Captain America, I think he looks at that flag and says, I'm not even going to try, because, you know, the whole, like, there's no shortcuts to this. You know, I'm going to work hard, and I'm just going to run. So while I think there is merit to the idea of portraying him as clever and smart, because he clearly is, I do think, I don't know, it rubbed me the wrong way a little bit.
Yeah. I think they could have done something better to showcase what they were trying to get across, which is, of course, his, I guess, tactical intelligence. But I think overall this, like, kind of montage thing does its job well, in that it accentuates his character without me ever thinking this is a bit much. You know, I never am watching this and thinking, all right, we get it, like, he's a good guy. Like, I watch it and I'm like, all right, like, this is...
Yeah, that's Captain America.
Yeah, exactly.
Ultimately, this montage is basically, I don't know, like 3 scenes. The next one, the final one, basically, is basically Peggy and the Colonel are just, having a debate of, like, why, or no, it was the Colonel and Dr. Erskine, and they're talking about, like, why even let Steve do it? The other dude, he's a perfect candidate, let's just do it. And there's more to this than whatever. What you need is courage. He pulls out a grenade, throws it, and then says, like, get down, and everyone runs for cover. Steve jumps on the grenade, says, everybody go away, he'll take it, or whatever he says. And I will say that scene, I think, very good. I think, in fact, that's probably, like, one of the better scenes of the MCU. Is like that really tells you a lot about the character. I think it's very powerful. Yeah. So I'll give it that one. And because this training montage of sorts was relatively short and didn't really lay it on too thick, I'm willing to forgive the flag scene. And I do think that scene was cute. So I don't think, like, overall this is pretty good. That's just probably one of my more minor grievances. Now, basically, with that done, with that grenade situation, Steve Rogers confirms that he is going to be the pick for the Captain America Soldier Serum. So he has this little talk with Erskine at that night, and they talk about, Steve is like, well, why me? It could have been anyone. And Erskine has this line where he says, a strong man takes the strength for granted, but a weak man who gets strength knows its value. And, they have a little conversation about, like, always stay true to your heart. Paraphrasing here. I don't think he actually says something like that. No. And then they have a funny little interaction where, with the drink and all that. Cut to next day. Or actually, no. Cut to Arnim Zola and Red Skull. They're messing around with the Tesseract. And they're developing weapon, stuff. They're developing. I don't know. I mean, does anyone know what this Tesseract actually does?
No. I think the only thing I got is that it releases massive amounts of energy, and they're just harnessing it to make weapons. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. So Arnim Zola's like, I'm working here, but it's gonna take some time, and Johann Schmidt is just like, no, it's the old work faster, just do it.
I hate when people do that shit.
So, what happens here? Oh, okay, yeah. So next up, we go to the, Steve has now been picked. We go to the scene where they go to this lab, basically, in Brooklyn. Alongside them is, so it's Steve, Peggy, Colonel, Dr. Erskine, Howard Stark, the Senator, I think, and then also, little guy, just little friend, reporter, or whatever, Heinz Kruger. I wrote down his name. He comes in with them, and they're all just here to witness the transformation. Steve goes in. We get this moment where, the machine is turned on. He's screaming in pain. He says, no, I can keep going. I can keep doing it. They complete. He comes out. He's ripped. He's Chris Evans.
Oh, boy.
Yep.
Hell yeah.
He is. One's got a question. How do you keep the pants on? I mean, he clearly grew like 3 feet. But, whatever. If Hulk can do it, then Chris Evans can do it. It's fine.
So, one of the things that I thought was interesting, because this didn't even occur to me the first time I watched it, but watching it the whole second time around, like, they had to CGI him for the whole, or do different shots at least, for the whole first, like, act of the movie there, when he's small. And he looks pretty damn good.
Yeah, I mean, it's noticeable, but it's like,
it is noticeable.
It's fine. I mean, here's the thing about it. I did some brief research into this just because it is such an impressive feat. It's impressive that they even thought that they could do it.
Yeah.
Because other movies have done similar stuff to this and usually not successful. I mean, even nowadays, we're still getting movies where, like, people watch Rogue One and they don't necessarily like how, General Tarkin looked, and people watch, I think it was Civil War, and there's a scene with young Tony Stark, and that kind of looked a little weird, and Ant-Man also had a scene like that. And so even now, we still haven't mastered this sort of mass manipulation of how people look, CGI, technology. So the fact that 8 years ago, they were just like, yeah, I mean, well, 40 minutes, sure, we could do that. And I think it was done now, the funny thing about this is that this movie's budget isn't crazy. I mean, it's basically the same as the other movies before it. So it was handed off to, from my understanding, 3 different production companies, and it was a very difficult process. And I think the rough idea of how they did it was multiple different ways, but basically they just had him pretend to be short. They would put put markers on where his eyes would be after it, and they'd put just markers for where people should be looking and where he should be looking, and then they just made him smaller. It's really not like they didn't have a body double or whatever. Yeah. They just did it, and that is impressive. So,
worked.
Next thing that happens, Steve Rogers comes out, Peggy smitten. Oh, I should say that going back before this, there's a scene with them going to the laboratory. They're in a taxi. Steve and Peggy are in a car. They have a little chat. It's very cute. Steve's like, I've never been dancing before or something. And she says, like, why not? And he says he's just looking for the right partner. And he gets some sparks there. Very cute. Then now with him out, I mean, I think if anything, it's a little thick there with how into him she is. I mean,
Yeah,
I almost feel bad because if you're a Steve, think about it like Steve Rogers, like, you know, I mean, Peggy didn't really pay attention to me all that much when I was small. Suddenly I step out of this lab program and, you know, she can't keep her hands off me. I don't know. I'd feel kind of shitty, but whatever.
Well,
fine.
I thought it was
70
a little...
years later and she's dead and he's not, so who cares?
Yeah, I thought it was a little thick. Like, even just before that, when he's screaming in the machine, she, like, demands they turn it off, and nobody else is saying anything. And I was like, really? Like, you're already freaking out about this?
I mean, he was screaming.
He was, like, yeah. And I mean, I don't know. Like, it could have been a totally natural response, but, like, just nobody else was really freaking out. Even the doctor was like, all right, we'll stop it. But, like, he wasn't. She was, like, yelling, no, you have to turn it off now.
Well, they went through with it, and out comes Steve Rogers, buff as fuck. Now, this little reporter guy that just tagged along, turns out, German spy. Who would have thought? He destroys the building, shoots Stanley Tucci in the chest. Now, this was a sad moment for me because I really enjoyed his character, and it makes me very upset that, you know, it makes me upset that most of these characters we don't really have potential to see later on.
Yeah.
Just because this was 70 years ago. But, you know, come on. If we could have found a way, I would have enjoyed seeing Dr. Erskine again.
Yeah.
So he dies. As he's dying, Captain America goes up to him, and then he does. I don't think he says anything, but just presses to his heart. You know, be the good man. Immediately, Captain America runs off. He's chasing after this German guy. Also, before he can get out, also before he gets out there, Granny, she's got the AK-47. She's the worst person. Why did they allow this old lady to be a part of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Whatever, okay. So the German spy runs out onto the streets. Peggy gets out there first. Now, Peggy, crack shot. I mean, this was an impressive shot. I mean, this is beyond impressive. That was like superhuman. Like, that is a super...
That was crazy.
She's invited to the Avengers now, basically, is what I'm getting at.
She has the same
Captain
powers
America,
as Deadshot.
Yeah.
Last second, she's about to take the shot to kill the guy, but she would have also gotten hit by the car. Captain America runs in, tackles her. She doesn't get to take the shot. He says sorry, runs after the guy. You know, he knows these Brooklyn streets pretty well. He's maneuvering through shortcuts. And even though the German spy is in a taxi, he's able to catch up with him with his superior running abilities. I thought this was actually fairly well done scene for, you know, like, you could tell that Steve doesn't really get how strong he is at this point. I mean, you have the shot where he's running at a normal speed and then looks down and then starts running super fast. And it's like, you really understand, you know, just the capabilities of how he's coming to understand it. It's not just a flick of the switch. He's not just like suddenly a god now. It is, while we never really see him learn or anything, we do see him progress in that sense. Yeah. So he's running. He's running to this to catch this German spy. The German spy gets out of his car, goes to kidnap a little boy, and then points a gun to his head. Steve's like, "Don't do it." The guy's like, "Sure, fine." Points the gun at him, shoots it, no bullet. Throws the kid in the water. Steve Rogers runs up to the kid. Kid's like, "No, I'm fine. Don't worry. I can swim." Best
Did
little
you know
kid.
that kid was later confirmed to be Peter Parker?
Wow, really? That's crazy. So what does this mean for the MCU timeline? Because Peter Parker was also in Iron Man 2. So do we say those movies are only 2 years apart now? Is the entire MCU taking place in the 1940s suddenly?
Yeah. The whole thing is just actually in the 60s. Nobody...
Actually, Peter stays a 10-year-old for like 70 years.
Well, what you have to understand is that he actually couldn't swim, so he drowned, but he froze in the water, and then they uncovered him 70 years later, and it's just like no one. I mean, who are you going to make a story about? This random kid or Captain America? So 70 years later, Captain America's unearthed with his kid, but everyone always just talks about Captain America. No one talks about Peter Parker. Anyways, Steve Rogers dives in after this German spy who is now in a submarine. I mean, Hydra's got tech all over the place. This guy just submarines out of the New York Bay or whatever. Steve Rogers just swims after him, and he gets in there. I mean, this guy's a super soldier, all right? He's gonna swim after the submarine, breaks open, pulls the guy out, and they drags him onto the land. Guy takes a cyanide pill, kills himself. Oh, he says, cut one head off, two more grow. Now, we go to an underground war meeting of sorts. And they're talking about, am I right here?
Yeah.
Am I wrong? Okay. So they're talking about what's the plan here? Because Erskine's dead, super soldier serums. I mean, it's just basically, it's not possible without this doctor. Colonel's like, we're going to go in after them. We're taking the fight to them, but we can't bring you, Steve. I was promised an army. You're just a dude. It's not going to work. Other guy comes in, some government person, says, Steve, I got just the job for you. You're going to be an American hero. Cut to Broadway musical. Steve is on stage reading off of cue cards. Support your government today and buy bullets for U.S. military. And then girls just dancing behind him and stuff.
He's very good.
Cut to, he's doing it again. Cut to, he's doing it again. He's doing it again. He's doing it again. Suddenly, Hitler's in the program, too. Now he's punching Hitler. Punching Hitler. Punching Hitler. Punching Hitler. Cut to, we're now where he's now doing the show for the military. He's doing it for the men overseas. Or not overseas.
Yeah.
Overseas.
Yeah.
So he's doing the show for them. They are not into it at all. I mean, they really don't care. Everyone else, like all the kids and stuff that he used to do it, everyone loved it. He was getting into it, but these guys, they just want to see the girls. Everyone's like that. Some of them had tomatoes for some reason, and they decided to throw those tomatoes at him.
Just in case the show was bad,
Yeah, I always carry a tomato with me. So he basically gets booed off stage. The girls come back on. He goes back there, and he, basically just sulks in a tent or something. In comes Peggy Carter. They talk about the show a little bit. Then something gets name dropped. I think she says the crew he was just performing for was what's left of the 107th, and 50 people are behind enemy lines held hostage right now. He runs up to I didn't say this, but if you watch the movie, you would know that 107th is the division that Bucky Barnes is a part of. He runs up to the colonel. He says, I need to know who's behind enemy lines. Is the name Bucky Barnes? Is he a part of the people? The colonel's like, Steve, I'm sorry. I do think that is one of them. Doesn't check. He just says, I think so. And they're just like, damn it, I'm going in. What if it wasn't? But Steve's like, fuck it, I'm going. He is basically ready to just drive in there as is, but Peggy's like, all right, all right, that's a little crazy. Let's give you a little help. Here's a plastic shield. he takes his prop shield. Okay. First of all, why is this thing actually functional? Because I laugh, but it did help him. It did stop Red Skull's punch. So for some reason, this prop shield he was using was fully functional metal. Anyways, he also takes one of the helmets, and then she also calls in a favor with Howard Stark. They fly behind enemy lines. He's going to parachute down. They have a little Howard Stark and Peggy talk a little bit of the fondue, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then he parachutes out, lands down in enemy lines, and then he just. Okay. It's a current scene that I might have missed a scene. Did we already miss the scene in which Red Skull kills a couple Nazis?
Yes.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, at some point in the movie, there's a scene, the Nazis come to visit Red Skull and are like, listen, Hitler's mad. He's like, screw Hitler, kills them all. That's it.
And I kind of rooted for him there.
Yeah, I mean, the enemy of my enemy. Okay, so back to where we were. Steve Rogers is now in enemy lines. He's sneaking. He's going in. And he's doing it. He just breaks everyone out fairly easily, actually. I think he takes how much? Did we say 50? 50 soldiers out? Actually, no. It was probably more than that, too, because He also gets like some non-U.S. soldiers too. So
Yeah.
he breaks out basically everyone. And what we learn is that all these people that they took hostage they're basically using them as like slaves to make the Tesseract weapons. But among the people he broke out, Bucky was not part of that group. He goes looking for Bucky. Finds him in this room, like this laboratory room of sorts, and he's being tested on. Now, with future context, we probably know that to some extent he was being, turned into the Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
I mean, we hear him like sort of mouthing and like stuttering through words at the beginning, some sort of code perhaps, and then also there's just some crazy stuff. I don't know. He's on a lab table. Breaks them out. He has a line. Bucky says, "I thought you were smaller." I forget what Steve says. I'm sure it's funny. They go out and they're basically just fighting their way through this. Cut to, we're now back at the camp, and the colonel is writing a letter saying that Steve Rogers is probably dead. I mean, he's he's gone.
This
and
guy
what,
really,
you want us to look for
he doesn't
him?
need to be very sure of himself.
Yeah, I don't
just,
think he's ever been very sure this whole movie.
So, while they're doing this, suddenly there's a commotion outside. In comes a battalion of soldiers. I will say, I thought this scene was really great. Now, there are some logistical issues.
Yeah.
Like, how did these people just walk into the camp? How did the colonel not know this was happening? I don't know. But I will say, very powerful, very motivating. I was like, this is a really cool scene. I could see this playing out in, like, half speed slow motion with really inspirational swelling music in the background, and that's the end of the movie right there. Guy comes in, Bucky's like, let's hear for Captain America, and they're all cheering. Captain America solidified as a hero now. Before he was just sort of this character that people read in comic books, but actually I think that was literally what was happening.
Yeah.
And now he is a war hero. Cut to, we're at another war meeting, I think. And he's basically just saying, they have Hydra bases here, 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 and here. Just got a brief glimpse at the map, already knows exactly where everything is. Then they're talking about like, all right, let's send in some people. Steve, you're gonna lead this mission. I'll get you the best guys. He says, I've got the best guys. Goes to a bar, recruits like 6 of the people he helped rescue. Now here's where I start going into like I think this movie was 2 hours long, so I don't necessarily want it to be longer, but I would have loved to have found room in here for expanding on these 6 people, because I think of like, compare this movie to Wonder Woman, who basically does that exact same thing. Now, I enjoy this movie more than I enjoyed Wonder Woman. I thought Wonder Woman was a great movie, but Wonder Woman also suffered from a pretty shitty third act that this movie didn't suffer from. But if I were to give Wonder Woman one thing over this, it did the whole, we're taking 6 dudes and then Wonder Woman and then going into a war, and they're going to use their specialized talent to help it. And, also to Wonder Woman's detriment, it didn't do it amazing, but it did it better than Captain America did.
Yeah.
And I feel like Captain America didn't even really try. They had the whole getting the team together and then just sort of skipped to the end and didn't really show us any of the middle stuff.
It was clear
But
Cap only cared about Bucky.
Yeah.
So basically, I think we just go into the montage at this point, and they destroy 5 of the 6 Hydra bases. We're on the last one, and for some reason this one's a little different. For some, it's gonna be harder. They're like, we can't just go
main
in
base,
Yeah, he's like, we can't just go in guns blazing, even though that's what they did for all the other ones. But then he's like, actually, I think we can just do that again. And he basically just does it again. Well, actually, no. Well, he does it. The thing is, he does it. He goes in, he says, surely the 6 of us can't go in guns blazing.
I'll do it myself.
I'll go in alone. So he goes in, and he takes out a bunch of guys, but ultimately gets caught by, like, these 2 flamethrower dudes, and everyone surrounds him. Luckily for him, they don't just shoot him on spot. Luckily, Red Skull has some sort of ego and wants to see him, because otherwise, terrible plan. Captain America dies right there. But that's not what happens.
He did say they couldn't just go in guns blazing.
Yeah, he was right. I don't know why he doubled down, why he went back on that. So he gets dragged back to Red Skull. Red Skull is toying with him. Now, this kind of bothered me. Red Skull's toying with him. They do some punching and stuff. And what bothers me is that Red Skull then pulls out his gun and is clearly about to kill him, at which point then the backups arrive. Now, I don't like that because it'd be one thing if Red Skull was going to say, I'm just not going to kill you right now, I'll kill you later, and then the group arrives. But it's another thing for him to delay his own killing that he is about to do, just like in a moment, and then because he delayed his own killing, he gets screwed. I think that falls into the line of, like, this was too convenient, too coincidental for me.
Yeah.
But the Howling Commandos, or whatever their name is, they come in through the window, and even then, I mean, as soon as you saw them, like, break the window, I mean, don't stop, just shoot
just
right
pull
there.
the trigger. It's really not that hard.
Yeah.
So they is this worth bringing up? Okay, yeah, sure. I'm just gonna throw this in. I don't actually know if this is worth it. All the way back when he first rescued Bucky, there was a scene where there's like a bridge.
Oh yeah.
Oh, actually, no. Is this scene?
No, this was before.
Okay, so this is the scene where Red Skull reveals himself as Red Skull, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so all the way back then, Bucky and Cap are escaping, and they meet in a bridge with Red Skull and Zola. And Red Skull reveals him. They get into a little tussle, but Red Skull reveals himself to have also been in the Super Soldier. Well, actually, no, I guess we already knew that. But he is a super soldier, rips off the mask. The downside of the first attempt at the super soldier serum was that, it ripped all his skin off or something, I guess.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
really
a pretty big downside. It's just a random one, like, what? Okay, you're super strong, but also you just have no skin. Okay, sure,
well,
whatever.
So I was kind of laughing because I watched it, and first I thought, oh wow, that looks pretty good. And then, like, later on in the movie, I was like, it's weird that, like, the rest of his face is kind of deformed and skull-shaped, but he still has lips. Like,
yeah, I guess I wasn't really, I wasn't looking that close.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that big a deal, but it's just like you could have gone like all the way and just made it a skull, but instead you just kept that.
I don't know. For me, the Red Skull, it looked good, but it was a little too smooth for my liking.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would have preferred a bit of a rougher edge to
more
the
skull-like. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, after that, we just to wrap out that scene, we have a moment where, Bucky and Cap have to run over, and Bucky makes it. Cap has to jump, and then we went back to where we were. Okay, so we're in this main base. Howling Commandos went in. They're fighting through. Basically, everything's going according to the good guys' plan, according to Captain America's plan. So, with things.
Did we skip the train scene?
Okay, so at some point in the movie,
I think it's the scene right before this one.
A lot of stuff happens in this movie. This is not an easy one. Okay, so at some point there was a train, and all these guys going on this train. Everyone gets. This is important too. I really shouldn't have missed this one. Okay, this is like I'm doing the recap for Winter Soldier. All right, I forgot to mention 2 movies ago. Okay, so. They're in this train thing. They're doing a train heist fight, whatever. They're trying to take out Zola. And on that, Bucky and Cap are fighting this one dude with a blaster. The Tesseract blaster knocks out Cap for a second. Bucky picks up the shield, then gets blown out of his hand, gets blown again out of the train, hanging on. Cap goes to save him, can't save him. Bucky falls to his death, presumably. There we go. That's that scene. Back to where we were. Everything's going good for the Captain America team. Red Skull acknowledges this, says, I gotta bounce. He gets into his plane, starts flying away. Captain America says, I'm going after him. Gets in a car with Peggy and the Colonel. They chase after him. Captain America jumps on the wheel of the plane, then climbs his way in. We're now over the ocean. He's fighting through some people. He sees a couple nukes basically in the back of this plane. Says like Chicago, says New York, etc., etc. We piece together, this guy's gonna blow up New York. Steve likes New York. He doesn't want to see that happen. So he's fighting through. This actually, I thought this was a fairly good fairly good fight scene. It wasn't just, you know, Steve fights people and then wins. It was Steve gets on, Captain America gets on this plane. The plane, you know, the bomb goes down, and then he has to sort of maneuver his way through that fight back into the plane to fly that plane back into the bigger plane. And I thought, like, there was enough going in this whole sequence from now until the end of the, you know, where he does the sacrifice. I thought this whole thing was very dynamic. You know, there was a lot of stuff happening, a lot of room for, you know, me to, like, it wasn't a fight where I could just, you know, go on my phone and, you know, check Reddit or whatever. It was a fight where it's like, I need to see how he's going to work the situation out.
Yeah.
So eventually, he just beats everyone up.
How he works every situation out.
Yeah. I was amazed he managed to fly the nuke back into the ship without making it blow up.
Yeah, when I was watching that, I forgot how he solved the situation. I was like, well, I mean, he's just not in the ship anymore. I don't know what he's going to do. Oh, he's just going to fly it back in. Okay, sure. So he flies it back in. Now he's making his way. Everyone's cleared. He's making his way to Red Skull. He gets to Red Skull, and they do. This is like their big fight. If this was the Incredible Hulk, it's the big New York Abomination versus Hulk fight. If this was Iron Man 2, it's Whiplash and Rhodey and Iron Man fighting. Except in this movie, it's a very short fight. I mean, it's like a couple blows, and then, you know, he pulls out a gun and it doesn't work, and then ultimately, I forget exactly what happens, but for some reason, like, I don't know if Red Skull just grabs the Tesseract, but for some reason he has the Tesseract in his hand, and then from that moment he just sort of dissipates forever, or, you know, asterisk. He goes away. Dead, I don't know. Wink. So, okay, at this point, Captain America, now we get into the real conflict. I mean, that was not the main conflict. Captain America gets on the plane. He's like, we're going to New York. I flew the nuke back onto the ship by accident. Don't ask why. This thing's autopiloted to New York. I don't know what to do. He gets on the radio with Peggy, and this is a really sad moment. I mean, this got to me. He's on the phone, and they're talking about, you know, I'll find you. Like, we'll figure out a way to land it. And he's like, you know, that's just not gonna happen. I gotta take it down. And then they start talking about, you know, dancing, and you know, how he still doesn't know how to dance. And she's like, I could teach you. You know, let's go to this bar on Saturday, 8:00. Don't be late. And then he's like, you know, I'd hate to step on your, and then cuts off. He lands in the ice, and it's just really sad. It's really, really sad.
Rip, Captain.
Now we open up. Actually, no. Actually, that doesn't happen yet. We go to, I think the only thing that happens between then and now is Howard Stark looks for the Tesseract, and then, well, he looks for the Tesseract, and also Captain America only manages to find the Tesseract. Now, fade to black. You think maybe the movie's over. It's not. Open up. We see Steve's eyes. He wakes up. He looks around. He's in a hospital, something like that. Looks like the 1940s, except in the background, he hears a baseball game on the radio. Nurse walks in. She says, "Good morning." Or not a nurse. Someone walks in. She says, "Good morning, Mr. Rogers." Or "Good afternoon." He says, "Who are you?" She says, "I don't know what that means." He says, "That game was in May 10th, 1941 or whatever. I was at that game." She says, you know, code red or whatever. Something. She presses a button. A bunch of armored soldiers. Armored's they are technically armored, not like metal knights walking in. Just a bunch of like black ops walk in basically, and he just busts through the wall. He just assumed that was gonna work. It wasn't. A good thing it wasn't concrete or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, no,
he just busts through.
That wouldn't have been a problem.
Maybe. That's probably true. He busts through and he runs out, and probably, I don't know, clearly the best scene in this movie, and I'd put this in maybe one of the best scenes in the MCU entirely. He runs out into New York, and we get this crazy shot, 360, as he's just staring at how different Times Square is. And you see all these ads, and you see all these like television screens, and it's really presents the scope of how things must feel for Steve Rogers. Like, this is out of this world, basically. This is unfathomable about how different this is. A bunch of cars pull up. Nick Fury walks out, and he says, I'm Nick Fury. What does he say? Can someone tell me? I forgot.
He said,
I'm Nick
I
Fury.
thought it'd be
A lot
better
has
to
changed.
break it to you gently.
But what is... Oh no! Okay, I was thinking the movie closes on him, but it doesn't. No. He basically says, "You're not the only hero out there." No, he says that to Iron Man. Whatever. he says something, and then Captain America says, "I had a date," and that broke my heart, man. That broke my heart. He had a date. That's all he cared about.
I mean, encouraged.
Yeah, he wakes up, he hears he's been asleep for 70 years, he's looking around, the world is completely different. I mean, he's seen crazy stuff with Howard Stark, but this is, this is something else. It's insane, and the first thing he thinks is like, where's Peggy? And that is why this romance just is so much better.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah. I'm wiping away tears right now. Alright. Then we go into probably like the worst end credit scene that I've
ever. I was also thinking the exact same thing. It was awful.
Yeah, cut to credits, open up, and we basically just get the scene out of Avengers, which is, that's not great, but it's fine. I mean, the same thing happened with Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 2 in the after credit, where it's basically just the shot from Hulk with Coulson and stuff. It's the same thing now. We get a shot of him doing the punching bag thing from Avengers. Then we get into the second after credit scene, which is just a trailer. I mean, it's literally just it's a trailer for the Avengers movie.
Yeah.
All right. That's basically the plot to Captain America. Very plot heavy movie, I'll say.
Yeah.
Let's just get this out of the way. Box office stuff. It's actually kind of sad for this movie because despite how good this movie was, about the same budget, 140 million as the other ones, but only grossed 370. In comparison, Thor grossed 450. So despite being a vastly better movie, Captain America did terrible at the box office, which makes me question, does this movie only really work with like the context, or not only work, but like does this work so much better now with the context of the MCU in front of it, and like maybe when you watch it for the first time without that knowledge it's not as good? Because I really cannot understand like why this movie would fail so horribly.
Yeah,
I mean, it would fail. I mean, it made its money, but like,
right. Well, I mean, one of the things to consider is that like, so we've all seen these movies when they like came out, and we were all kids. So one of the target audiences, of course, would be kids. And I think that, we're not, when you're 8 to 10 years old, you're not incredibly story driven. You just want to see that fight. And this didn't really have that.
That's true.
So I think
this still managed to deliver cool action scenes though.
It did, but like when you go to a Marvel movie, you're expecting, especially like I said, if you're like an 8-year-old boy, you're expecting that CGI fight, and like it wasn't really there. Like there was.
Well, I would even say, but to counter that, I would say Thor didn't have like a ton of action either. I mean,
right,
and that movie did 100 million.
Right, they did have this big CGI fight though.
Yeah, but it was it was Thor versus the Destroyer. You think people really were like? I don't know. I mean, I don't remember.
No,
but
that's why I mean. Didn't Iron Man do better than both of them?
Yeah, I mean, Iron Man 1 has done the best out of all of these.
CGI fight.
Actually, let me check Iron Man 2 box office. Yeah, Iron Man 2 did the best, with basically double what Captain America did.
That's why.
I mean, it was like 1.8.
Yeah, I do think overall this movie, like, is better than the rest of them story-wise. But yeah,
we'll get that into a little bit with the ranking. Basically, box office, not good for this movie, unfortunately. I also kind of wanted to talk, before we get into some segments and stuff, I kind of want to talk about Captain America as, and I don't want to go too deep into this because we'll watch more movies and we'll talk about it then as well. But this movie, to touch on the idea of with the context of the MCU in front of it now, this did a really great job of like establishing who Steve Rogers is as a character to utterly dismantle him in the further movies. Because I mean, you talk about it will dismantle in a certain way. He still stays the same, but it revolutionizes basically.
Yeah.
Right now, we have this guy. He is just the American patriot. You know, he's like, the government's going to war. I'm trying to fight that war. You know, I believe in America. You go into Winter Soldier and like things he learns just, well, really Avengers, the next movie. We'll touch this then, and you see him starting to have his doubts, and then you flash forward to Infinity War, where he is like, you know, basically just going to General Ross and being like, fuck you, I'm doing whatever I want. And, you know, the thing that remains consistent throughout it all is the idea that he's still acting on what he believes is good, and that is just... It's just what he believes is good has changed in a sense. So I would still call Cap a good man. It's not like he believes he's good, but he's really a villain or anything. Like, he's still a good guy, but it's just the perspective has changed so much. And that's why I think, like, you know, we were going to do a video on like Iron Man versus Captain America in terms of just characters. And I watched these movies, you know, this was like 4 months ago. I watched these movies and I was like, Captain America is a really, really great character. Probably like the best, in my opinion, the best character of the MCU.
Yeah. I think it's good because you really do see the two of them develop. I don't want to say in polar opposite directions, but in different directions and as different people. But I do think it's like, it is good to see that, like, those layers and how they... Because, like you said, it's not like he really changes. It's just like, so he has this moral compass, and at first the world he's in kind of aligns with that, or he's aligned with it. And then he shows up 70 years later, and now the world's changed, and he starts to realize that over the course of these movies. And you really see how that affects him and his decision-making over, you know, as things progress.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
Cap
I think
in
people...
the 40s feels like a very different character from Cap in the 2010s.
Well, the movie, like the world in the 40s, in these movies presented, feels different.
Yeah,
I mean, it just...
absolutely.
They're like... In this entire movie, it is never questioned why we're going to war, or like, of course, Nazis. I mean, that is like the I mean, that is the one thing people tend to agree on is like, okay, the Nazis were bad.
Yeah, like, we need to do
like,
something about that.
You know, it is never once brought up of like the nature of war, or like, are we actually accomplishing anything, or like, is this the right way to go about things? It is just like, this is a given, this is what we are going to do. And you flash forward to something like Civil War, where it is literally like, the idea is there is no good here, and it's like just different perspectives on this issue. And and I think that just shows, you know, a vastly different world from then to what we have now. And I don't know, it's very, I think people tend to look at the MCU and say Iron Man really leads this whole thing, and that's true. I mean, I do think Iron Man is the star of the MCU as a whole, but you really got to give credit to Captain America, and I think it's funny how much credit you should give to Captain America, considering this is the 4th movie we're about to go into Avengers. Like, it's not Thor, it's not the Hulk, it is Captain America and Iron Man. So the fact that Captain America is able to do that despite being 4th in line, I think is really impressive.
Honestly, before we started doing these rewatches, I had the impression on the Avengers series that Cap was sort of like the main character. It wasn't really until I took a second glance at it that I started seeing, you know, how important Iron Man was as a character to those storylines.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're both, I mean, and you know, I will admit that I do think Iron Man, you know, just simply has more, I mean, you go to, and we're not going to spoil Infinity War here, but you go to Infinity War, and clearly Iron Man just takes up more precedence here. If anything, that is one of my biggest gripes with that movie that we can get into when we get to it, is that Captain America doesn't get enough screen time. But, you know, clearly Iron Man is just the star, and that's fair, that's true, but I don't know. Captain America, my favorite, I think the best character in this. Let's just, to transition from that, let's talk about villains. Let's talk about Red Skull. Before we do, though, can you just give us your ranking, the list as it is now before Red Skull?
So, before Red Skull, it is at the top Loki, then Abomination, then Whiplash, then Justin Hammer, then Obadiah Stane at the bottom.
All right, before you go ahead and place a rank for Red Skull, let's talk about this a little bit. Great villain. I mean, really solid villain. It's And the thing is, he's not a Loki where there's so much depth to his character or anything. I mean, he's relatively basic. I barely remember his name. You know, I know Red Skull, but I don't know Johann Schmidt. You know, I looking at the wiki page to see that. So it's not like he has this huge layer of depth to him. But I think, I don't know, there's just something about him. It's just...
So... One of the things that I think makes him so appealing is that there really is no depth to this character. Like, you look at him and you're like, oh, this man, like, is a Nazi. He's evil. And, like, there's no question about... Like, he's very much the polar opposite of Loki, where you're never questioning his stance or his morality or what he's doing. Like, it's clear that this is a bad guy with bad... Yeah, exactly. He's doing Nazi stuff. Like, this is a bad guy doing bad things, and he needs to be stopped. And, like... I think there's something... He provides a good contrast to Captain America, because you're watching Captain, you're like, this is a good guy with good intentions who's going to do the right thing. And Red Skull is the exact opposite of that. Like, he's a bad dude and he needs to be stopped, you know?
Kind of mirrors the moral ambiguity of the whole movie, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or lack thereof of ambiguity. And you know, I think towards something like when I made a bunch of Legend of Korra videos, I had talked about, because Legend of Korra sort of plays around with the idea of, you know, the villains aren't exactly villainous in the same way that like Ozai was in The Last Airbender, where Ozai is just a bad guy. And a lot of people counter me with that, like, well, so what if he's just a bad guy? If his purpose to the story is served super well, then he's a great character regardless. And I think that's true. I mean, I think that is true, especially in this case with Red Skull. I mean, he is no doubt evil, and because he is no doubt evil, it serves the story really well. It fits with the world they were building for the 1940s. It fits with the character of Captain America, who the undoubtedly good guy in this story. I think it was a great foil. So I don't know. I'm going to say, for me personally, I don't necessarily, you know, I'm not, your list is your list. I don't know if he's necessarily better than Loki, but I think there's a conversation to be had there at the very least.
Yeah, I agree. So doing the ranking, I was really struggling between him and Loki, because he clearly outclassed all the other guys. I ended up putting him in second, right behind Loki, simply for the fact that I found Loki, because Loki has more layers, has more depth, is someone you kind of have to pick apart and be like, okay, this is why he's doing this. And you can kind of see, like, why he's doing it. You can understand what's going on here. Whereas with Red Skull, and this is, you know, it helps him for this movie, and it adds to the feel that we're getting. But, like, there's no scenario where I think, yeah, that's what I'd be doing. Like, he's just a bad guy. And, like I said, it works, but it's not something that I can get behind and study like I can for Loki and say, all right, yeah, I can see why this is going on. It's like, no, this is just a bad guy.
There's a sort of lasting effect that Loki has on the viewer, because you are forced to recognize how much is there to like dissect. And even, you know, because the Red Skull sort of is a great villain because of who he is in the story, you end up just thinking about the story, and Red Skull kind of becomes second fiddle to that. So there's the lasting effect on Loki. I think that's a fair choice. All right,
so one other thing, I didn't
wait, hold on, Zero, what were you saying?
I think I agree with your position, but I don't necessarily agree with your impression, because, well, I do think Red Skull's very good. I think he's, like, only slightly better than Abomination, because of how, like, I guess vague his characterization was, and how, like, obvious, maybe obvious is not, like, how straightforward his goals were. I think it works for this movie, like...
Right, I agree. If you put him in something else, it doesn't work as well.
I definitely think it's indicative of the overall running problem that we've had with the MCU, not paying that much attention to their villains, and it just happens to work into this movie pretty well. Right,
and I think that shows... I think it's one of the things that exemplifies... you know, the story of Captain America set in World War II in the 1940s, where this black and white, like, it works. Whereas if you try to put someone like Red Skull in these other movies, if you don't flesh him out, it doesn't work like that. It's not nearly as good. So
I think one of the earlier ranked reviews, I had said something about, like, I might be completely lying here, and I never said this, but I said it's like putting a square into a circle hole, and it's just not working. But so as opposed to the correct, like making a good villain would be making that square into a circle to put into the circle hole. In this one, they just said, let's just turn that circle hole into a square. So the villain is still bad, but the movie, or not bad, but the movie changed itself to accommodate the villain as opposed to making the villain great. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
okay.
That's the analogy.
Yeah.
All right.
So one last thing, I deliberated for quite some time on whether or not to put Armin Zola on this list, and I decided not to, even though he had enough screen time for it, just because he didn't do anything. Justin Hammer had a plot.
Movie.
Yeah, exactly. Justin Hammer had a plot and a direction that was separate from Whiplash's and could have been, was able to progress without him. Everything Armin Zola did was just in the shadow of Red Skull, and there was no independence on his part.
And Arnim Zola, I mean, just a brief spoil, is that Arnim Zola will come back, and he'll get a place on this list.
That is the only reason why I deliberated about putting him on here now. But I'll just put him on later.
Quick question: are you gonna give Loki a completely separate ranking when we get to the Avengers?
I probably
so you're gonna have Loki, Thor, and then Loki
just
Avengers.
Adjust his ranking based on how he does in.
Okay.
Because Dark World, he's not the bad guy, right? I didn't see Dark World.
Dark World, no, he's not.
Right. Yeah, so I think I'm not going to count him as the villain for Dark World. I'm not going to count him for Ragnarok or the other movies he's in. But I will adjust his ranking based on what I think of him, kind of combine the thoughts of Thor and the Avengers and redo his ranking based on that.
Okay. The other segment, the other list that we keep is the Black Widow watch. Unfortunately, it doesn't show up in this movie either.
Bit of a shame.
Oh, wow.
Only had one appearance so far, Iron Man 2. So as far as I'm concerned, Iron Man 2 still number one for that list.
But we're still watching her.
Yeah, I'm waiting. I mean, the scene at the end where the nurse walks in and she was a redhead. I'm like, oh, whoa! I mean, is it her? I'm watching. It's not. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't her.
Okay, that works for S.H.I.E.L.D.
Anyways, at the end of these, right before we do the ranking, we just like to talk about if there are any comic book counterparts. So far, historically, there have not, but I know for a fact that once we get further in, there are going to be some comic book counterparts, and when they do, we'll be reading those. But we also, for these origin stories, we could just go back to the 80-year-old origin stories that they did. So, Zero, you read the origin story for Captain America, plus a little bit more. Why don't you tell us about some similarities, notable differences?
Well, Captain America's first appearance was actually in 1941. The first comic was basically that one scene where Steve Rogers turns into Captain America, in the lab, and then the head scientist gets killed. That's pretty much all of the context we're given. There's, no insight into the selection process for this particular soldier. There's not even, I don't think we get to see what he looked like before the transformation at all. So, this scrawny guy gets buff might be a new concept, and he might have just always been buff. Then, then I accidentally read the first appearance of Bucky, because I didn't realize it was the next comic. And that was very interesting, because it was a completely different Bucky. In this rendition, he's like a kid sidekick, basically. He's a Robin clone. And it basically starts with him reading a Captain America comic book, being like, damn, this Captain America guy is so cool. And then Cap, he happens to be friends with Steve Rogers, and he catches him in costume, and then he's like, whoa, you're Captain America. He's like, you're right. You have to keep my secret now, and that makes us partners.
Okay.
All right.
So that's how he becomes Bucky.
That sounds like the Tim Drake story, but if Tim Drake wasn't smart.
Yeah. It's the Tim Drake story, but by accident.
Okay. And then you also read, if I'm correct, you read an issue with Red Skull?
Yeah, that was the real crazy one, because the change to Bucky was not nearly as severe as the change to Red Skull.
Oh,
Okay.
I wish we could like pull up a picture of him, because he actually looks so ridiculous in this comic. He has like a big head.
Alright, I'm
He's
looking
wearing
it up.
just
I'm
like a
looking it
big
up.
red shirt with a white swastika in the middle. It's just, he looks ridiculous.
Okay.
I have to find this.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. That's a big head.
That's a big head.
Alright,
He kills
so
a guy by basically doing the penance stare, if you know what that is. He just looks into his eye and kills him. Also like the Sharingan. And,
okay. So-
this was some guy that Cap knew. I don't really remember the context. And then, obviously, Cap's like, well, he killed my buddy. I'm gonna have to go find this Red Skull guy. He actually had a reputation for being, like, sort of a ghost. And,
So, Mike, okay, so we clearly have some pretty severe differences. Do we have similarities here?
the only real similarity... he doesn't seem to have any affiliation to Hydra. I don't even know if that's a thing in this comic. But he does have, like, a group of Nazis that follows him. Close that door.
Okay. Sure. Okay, this is a really weird... I'm looking at pictures. This is really just odd looking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very bizarre.
So one question I have is, if he's created in 1942, then is the ice thing not... When does that...
That doesn't happen
does
in
that
any
work?
of the comics I read. I think that's because...
It's still the 40s. The war is still on.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Well, I thought maybe if this was like a really important aspect to his character, he could have just been at that point from like World War One era in Frozen, and now he's back for World War Two.
No, in these comics, it's literally like the whole time skip thing is just not a concept yet.
Well, that's interesting then, because that means at some point, you know, it's 1980 or something, and they're like, instead of just having this take place in the 1980s, they're just gonna have it still, the origin is still gonna take place in the 1940s, and we're just gonna freeze them.
Yeah,
That is interesting.
That is, yeah, okay. That is, I wouldn't have expected that to be the case. Okay, so that is the comics, I suppose. Anything left to say on that before just transitioning out?
not really.
Yeah, cool comic. Okay, last thing we do here, of course, we rank the MCU week by week. The list as it stands now. At the bottom, number 4, Hulk. Number 3, Thor. Number 2, Iron Man 2. And number 1, Iron Man. Alright, I'll put this out there. I'm not gonna say this is my vote. We could have a discussion, but number 1. I mean, this movie is number 1 for me.
It was also
I'm not
number
gonna
one
say
for
this
me.
is my vote, but this is number 1 for me.
Well, I'm just saying, like, that is where I want to place it. I could be talked out of it if you guys, you know.
I have no ambition
disagree.
to talk you out of that. So
So see, I actually do sort of agonize with this versus Iron Man 1, because they're both good.
yeah,
I do
But
think
this is-
this
I don't
movie
know,
has
man.
like less flaws though. But Iron Man 1, I don't know. There's certain things about Tony Stark's character that makes him sort of a more entertaining protagonist. And
That is what I think people say. Like, that is, I just glancing around, people seem to think, like, you know, this movie that is not bad, it's just boring. I don't even necessarily feel that way. I mean,
I
yeah,
wouldn't say
so-
that.
I wouldn't
some of
say
the
that
middle
either.
stuff, I was starting to be like, you know, the montage of destroying the Hydra bases was like, okay, this is whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's such a powerful ending, and in a series in which we don't really have that, you know, all of the endings thus far, some of them are fine, some of them not fine. You know, for one to be amazing, and then also to have such great scenes like the grenade, and then
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it is really hard for me not to just have this definitive... Like, going into this, I was like, okay, well, I can't put it above Iron Man 1 because... Oh. It is just above Iron Man.
Well, yeah,
Well,
and I mean, one
you
of the
can
things. No, go ahead. Zero.
I said
Come
you
on.
could go.
No, I insist.
You were already talking when he said you could go, and then you changed your mind.
No, that's Skype lag.
I am making a deliberate choice. Kaiser, you can go first.
Okay. So, one of the things is, like, you know, you read the comics and you want some sort of, like, one of the complaints people had with Iron Man 3 is that Mandarin was nothing like he was in the comics, and so you want a bit of carryover from the comics to the movies. And one of the reasons why I'm such a huge fan of Captain America is, as a history buff, as someone who's really into World War II, like, this holds up really well from a historical aspect. Like, everything, aside, like I said, aside from the fact that there was a lot more cars than I think there should have been, it all looked like the 1940s. It felt like the 1940s. I totally bought it. Everything very much seemed in order there, and I think that,
just
like,
to tag on to that for a second, I normally don't note on, you know, the only time I think I've specified this was I thought Iron Man 1 had a very distinct look that I thought made it, you know, stand out. I think this movie also, you know, I'm not going to claim to be an expert here, but the way they did the color grading for this movie, you could tell it was 1940.
Yeah.
You know, everything just had sort of a dulled out brown to it, and it was like clearly an intentional choice to just make it look, you know, not distractingly, you know, it's not like, oh, black and white, but you know, it is very clearly, you know, meant to give that aged look to it. So just to tag on to that point a little bit. All right, Zero, are you gonna make your choice as number one? Are you gonna, I mean, the majority, if you don't, I mean, either way, the majority's vote. Yeah. But, you know.
Well, I mean, I've been a Captain America fan for a while now. Or at least a fan of him in the MCU, because I never really read his comics, but... I mean, I am going to say this is number one, because I think it's a more solid movie all around, you know? It doesn't have that third act pitfall.
Yeah.
I was really confident that, well, not really confident, but we were talking about before this about how we're going to do tiebreakers, because I really thought this was not going to be, I did not think everyone was going to agree on number one. I thought it was going to be like the standalone on that, but I guess we all have great taste.
I thought if anything, you Hoodie would be the one to hold out, but I was pretty sure me and Kaiser were going to say it was number one.
Yeah. This movie is the reason I got into World War II in the first place, so this has a level of value because of that to me. So I didn't necessarily know for sure it was going to be number one, but I knew I was going to rank this higher than most of the other ones.
Well, that's a little Kaiser fun fact for you. All right, that's going to do it for this week's MCU Ranked review. If you're watching this, I completely forgot the list as it stands now. Number one, Captain America. Number two, Iron Man. Number three, Iron Man 2. Number four, Thor. And number five, Hulk. Now that's going to do it for this week's MCU Ranked review. If you're watching this as it goes up public on YouTube, then you could be watching next week's episode right now by heading over to patreon.com/KatoYT. Otherwise, we will be back again next week with the Avengers.